of it. And also, if you're in a ship and you come across the Flying Dutchman, and there's been hundreds of sightings of the Flying Dutchman, then you are in peril, because the crew of the Flying Dutchman will try and pass you messages and letters to people who are long dead. And if you take those messages or you accept that mail, great peril will befall your ship and all aboard will be lost. So it was in the age of superstition back in those days, this was a huge fear of seamen cruising around the world. And there has been a lot of other sightings, as I said, of the Flying Dutchman. One of the most famous was when the British vessel HMS Buchanty was was part of a small flotilla of ships that was cruising around the world. It was on a 3-year cruise around the world, and on board was Prince Albert Victor, who was second in line to the British throne, and also Prince George, who was third in line to the British throne, but who would become King George V. Now, Prince Albert Victor was the officer of the watch one night as the ship was cruising the Indian Ocean off the coast of Western Australia, and the lookout reported seeing a ship. And this is the official entry into the log of HMS Buchanty of the time. And it says, and this is the punctuation is entirely accurate, during the middle watch, the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. She appeared as a strange red light as of a ship all aglow, in the midst of which light the masts, spars and sails stood out in strong relief. As I said, that's from the official log of a Royal Navy ship. And the Admiralty, in their official version of the cruise of HMS Buchanty, have that passage in the official log. So pretty incredible stuff. Also, other notable people, Admiral Karl Donitz, who was in charge of all the German U-boat fleets, submarine fleets, during World War II. He put in his official diary in 1942 that some of his U-boat crews had reported encounters with the Flying Dutchman east of Suez, and that these crews had reported that they would rather fight the Allied fleets in the North Atlantic than come across this phantom ship again. And then in 1939, dozens of people on a beach in South Africa reported seeing the Flying Dutchman under full sail, heading straight towards the beach, and then all of a sudden it disappeared just as disaster was about to happen. There's also talk that all the lighthouse keepers around the Cape in South Africa have a pact. They've all seen the Flying Dutchman several times, but they've got a pact that they don't talk about it in case people suspect that they're insane or drunk on watch or telling porkies lies. So that's the legend of the Flying Dutchman. Now, it's very unlikely that we'll come across the Flying Dutchman on this cruise, but if we do, please, no one take any mail from anyone on board the ship. We're going to talk about the Lady Lovermond. Now, this is a famous ship from 1748, and it's a story of romance and jealousy and murder. And what occurred is that Captain Simon Peel was the captain of the Lady Lovermond, and he married his longtime sweetheart, the beautiful Annetta. His best friend, who was also the first mate aboard the ship, was his best man at the wedding. That was a guy by the name of John Rivers. Now, Rivers had actually also fallen secretly in love with the beautiful Annetta, and was extremely jealous of his captain, even though he'd been the best man at his wedding. On the night of the wedding, Rivers could hear the lovemaking going on in the cabin next door and became so incensed and furious that he went ashore and visited several taverns and got drunk, and several witnesses heard him say that if he couldn't have Annetta, then no one else could. The captain and his new bride had a wonderful group of friends, and they'd all come to see them off. And the captain was going to take his new bride on a voyage from London over to Portugal as part of the honeymoon, which even in those days, 1748, there was talk at the time that having a woman at sea was cursed. It was very, very bad luck. It's lucky we don't feel this way, gentlemen, isn't it? So it was really bad luck to have a woman at sea, and this added fuel to that fire, because what happened is that when the ship sailed on the 13th of February, the crew were all having celebrations up on the main deck. There was lots of music, there was dancing, everyone was happy, except for John Rivers. And he snuck up behind the bosun who had the helm that night, struck him across the back of the head, and took control of the ship. And under full sail, it sailed towards the Goodwin Sands, which is off the coast of Kent in England. Now, this place is renowned for shipwrecks. There's been over 2,000 shipwrecks in that area over history. And yes, Lee, we are cruising through that area when we pick up the boat in England, and yes, we will be extremely cautious when we go through that area. But the ship, Rivers, taking the helm of the ship, aimed it straight for the Goodwin Sands, and the ship was destroyed upon the sands, and there were no survivors. There was every soul on board died, which is a tragic thing to happen. But then something unusual happened. Exactly 50 years later to the day, in 1798, another vessel by the name of Edenbridge, with a captain Seaborn, was cruising through that area, and he reported that a three-masted schooner had come out of nowhere and crossed his path, nearly collided with his ship. And even though he could hear celebration, it came so close that he could hear celebrations, he could hear music and laughter on deck, even though he couldn't see anyone on the deck. And that the ship was headed directly for the Goodwin Sands. And there was also a fishing trawler in the area at the time, and the captain of the fishing trawler reported exactly the same sort of thing. And he said that the vessel continued on and broke up on the Goodwin Sands. So both of these captains immediately went back to port and reported the tragedy, and the local authorities sent out a lifeboat to investigate. The lifeboat found absolutely no wreckage, no survivors, and there was never any reports of any vessels that were missing in that area. So mysterious. But then again, exactly 50 years later again, witnesses having a picnic on the cliffs overlooking the Goodwin Sands saw a three-masted schooner, fitting the description of the Lady Lovibond, heading straight for the Goodwin Sands under full sail. They rushed back and reported the incident as well. And once again, a lifeboat went out to investigate, and once again, no survivors, no wreckage, and no reports of any ships missing in the area. And then 50 years later, again to the day, an identical report was put in, and once again, nothing was ever found. 50 years later, in 1948, an American sea captain by the name of Captain Bull Prestwick reported that a three-masted vessel, had come very close to his vessel and had gone on and crashed into the Goodwin Sands. He didn't see it as a ghost ship. He reported later, when he was talking to the media, that he didn't think it was a ghost ship, but when you read his log, it said that it had an eerie green glow around it, and once again, nothing was ever found. In 1998, the local council, trying to generate tourism revenue for the area, reported that, why don't you come down for a Valentine's Day weekend, and while you're here you can see the Lady Lovibond crash into the Goodwin Sands. And they received, the area was packed. Lots of people came down to see it. All the hotels and the B&Bs and the taverns were very, very happy about it, but the council actually received a lot of negativity about the fact that they were trying to cash in on this tragedy that had happened 200 years ago. So what's next? In 2048, Lee and I plan to be aboard the Sunshine Coast, and we'll be off the Goodwin Sands, and if anyone's interested in coming along, we'll be taking deposits outside a little bit later on with an 18% surcharge. Now, another vessel that was found in these waters not so long ago. So this is in the Philippines, so not very far from where we're going to be in the next couple of days, down here. And it only happened just over a year ago, in February 2016. Now, I first heard about this by news reports that had gone out around the world, and it was a report that two Filipino fishermen had boarded this yacht that looked like it was in distress, and on board they'd found the mummified remains of a man, a sailor on board. Mummified, not decomposed. And even news sources like CNN reported this strange mystery. And they were saying that this man, Manfred Bayort, had been travelling the world aboard a yacht for over 20 years, but his last known sighting was 11 years previously in the southern Indian Ocean off South Africa, and that he hadn't been heard of for 11 years. So what had happened to him? It was a mystery. And I'm going to put up an image in a second. It's a little bit graphic, so if you're a little bit queasy or don't want to see anything graphic this time of the morning, just turn away and I'll change the screen in a second. But this is an actual photo of Manfred as he was found. He is said to have a terrified look on his face, and he was reaching for the radio at the time. And as I said, in a mummified state. So what had happened? I'll change that to a nicer image. There you go. Did anyone turn away? You bloodthirsty lot, aren't you? Did anyone faint? Look around. If you did faint, put your hand up. If you're unconscious lying on the floor, put your hand up. The reason I ask, and just as an aside, Lee and I have a friend who's a Royal Australian Navy diver by the name of Paul de Gelder. And a few years ago, he was on exercise in Sydney Harbour, and he was attacked by a bull shark. And he lost his right arm and his right leg. And contrary to what most people that aren't from Australia think, there's not that many shark attacks in Australian waters. There's certainly not many shark attacks in Sydney Harbour, and not many on an elite Navy divers. So this was very, very big news around Australia. And the Navy had actually filmed the exercise, and there was footage of the actual shark attack. And there was also photos taken about when Paul was pulled out of the water into the rubber ducky, and when he was transferred to the ambulance, and when before the operation at the hospital. And so pretty graphic sort of stuff. Now, because of the nature of what had happened, and because it was so sensational, Paul did a lot of interviews with radio stations and TV stations over the next few months as he recovered. And it was all about the actual shark attack and his recovery. And then he went on to be doing guest speaking presentations for people. And during those presentations, he would show some of that graphic image. And he'd tell people that if you don't want to see it, turn away. And no one would. And he was, as of a couple of weeks ago, about 5 weeks ago, he was still very proud of the fact that over 60 people had fainted during his presentations. The vast majority of them were men. Women have been through childbirth, it's no big deal. So, I mean, I'm actually disappointed that no one actually fainted here this morning, because I could have set up a bit of a competition with Paul. But anyway, so what had caused our friend Manfred to die? As I said, he'd been last sighted in the southern Indian Ocean off the coast of South Africa 11 years before. That was what the news reports were saying. We've heard about another vessel that operates in the southern Indian Ocean off South Africa this morning, the Flying Dutchman. Had he seen the Flying Dutchman? Had he come across the Flying Dutchman? Had they tried to pass him messages? Had he rushed downstairs into his cabin and tried to reach for the radio with a terrified look on his face? And had the curse of the Flying Dutchman caused him to die and become into a mummified state? Well, no. What had happened is that 8 days before he was found, he had updated his Facebook status, which you do. And according to the autopsy reports, shortly after that, he had a massive heart attack and he died. And the fact that he was in a mummified state instead of a decomposed state was because of the high and constant level of humidity in the area, and the fact there was a lot of salt in the air, and because there was no insects to cause the body to decompose. So that's why it's in a mummified state. So we've solved that mystery once and for all. We can move on to the next one, which is the famous curse of the Mary Celeste. And this was a very cursed ship, and I think I know why. And you're going to be the first people to find out why. So the history of the Mary Celeste, she was a brig that was built in Canada in 1861, and she was named the Amazon. And from the very start, she had a troubled existence. On her maiden voyage, her captain became ill and died suddenly. Another captain took over, and he was supposed to take the Amazon on a voyage from America over to the UK. He hit some fishing equipment off the coast of Maine and damaged the ship and had to return to port for extensive repairs. Then he collided with another vessel on the Thames estuary off the coast of England, and that ship sunk. So things weren't going all that well for the Amazon. In 1867, she was thrown onto a reef during a storm and was written off as a wreck. But an American actually bought her under salvage, and he took her back to New York and spent about $9,000, which was a fortune at that time, to repair the ship and bring her up to so she was seaworthy. And he renamed her the Mary Celeste. But because of the money that he'd poured into this boat, he went bankrupt. And so the trustees sold the vessel to another consortium, who amongst the consortium was Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Now, he was a very well-known, very well-respected sea captain. He had a lot of experience. He was a very, very sober man. He didn't touch alcohol at all. He was a God-fearing man. He married his cousin, Sarah. Americans. And they had two children, a son, Arthur, who was 7 years old, and a daughter,